The storm over Cleveland carried more than wind that night. It carried a reckoning. Long before the snow swallowed the streets, 5 men thought a struggling mother and her 2 children would be easy prey. They laughed in the dark, certain no one would stand in their way. But justice has a habit of arriving quietly at first, then striking like thunder. Because waiting at the mouth of that alley was a former Navy SEAL with a broken knee, a scarred heart, and a service dog trained to face danger without blinking. And when those men stepped forward, they walked straight into the consequence they had been writing for years. Before the story unfolds, share this video with someone who still believes wrong deeds return home. Tell us where you are watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, justice, and second chances. Winter night in Cleveland, opening scene under 40 words. A hard winter wind swept across Cleveland's Harbor District, driving icy snow along the empty sidewalks and rattling the neon signs of small diners clinging to the cold. Rachel Adams pushed through the door of Perry's Diner with her 2 children close beside her. She was a slender woman in her mid-30s, a little under average height, her dark auburn hair tucked beneath a knitted hat that had lost its stretch. Her cheeks were pale from the cold, and her hands were stiff inside fraying gloves. Years of overwork had left faint lines around her eyes, yet there was a quiet gentleness in her face that hardship had not erased. Emma and Jack, her 6-year-old twins, were small for their age and bundled in thin winter jackets that did little to guard against the freezing air. Their freckles stood out against their chilled cheeks, and both carried a hopeful brightness in their eyes that made Rachel's chest tighten every time she caught it. Inside, warmth shimmered through the diner. Plates clattered. Someone laughed near the counter, but Rachel stood frozen for a heartbeat, clutching her purse as if afraid it might break open and reveal her last $20 bill. She guided the twins to a booth near the wall, her shoulders curled inward as though trying to make herself invisible. Across the room, a man watched from a corner table. Ethan Cole, around 40, sat with a cup of black coffee and a half-finished plate of scrambled eggs. He carried the solid build of someone whose strength had been carved through years of discipline rather than vanity. His jaw was angular, shadowed by neatly trimmed stubble. Silver threads touched his temples, giving him a distinguished but worn appearance. His winter coat, a deep navy color, hung heavy across broad shoulders, and the faint stiffness in his left leg revealed an injury long healed but never forgotten. Ethan moved quietly, almost cautiously, a habit from years of service that never left him. Beside him lay Ranger, a large German shepherd with dark sable fur and sharply focused amber eyes. Ranger was 6 years old, trained with precision and patience, and he carried himself like a soldier in his own right. His black harness, marked clearly with service dog, "Do not pet," clung to his sturdy frame. Unlike most dogs, Ranger did not fidget or seek attention. His ears swiveled independently, tracking footsteps and distant voices with a calm readiness. There was something in the dog's posture, disciplined, confident, that signaled a quiet warning to anyone who might be foolish enough to threaten his handler. Rachel opened the menu and felt her heartbeat falter. The prices were higher than she remembered. Soup, bread, burgers, everything seemed beyond reach. Her fingers slid into her purse again, grazing the worn $20 note. She shut the purse quickly and forced a smile when Emma pointed excitedly at a picture of a plate she knew she could not afford. When the waitress arrived, Rachel lowered her eyes and murmured, "We'll take 1 bowl of soup, and 1 roll, please." Her voice trembled at the end. "Mom?" Jack asked softly. "Aren't you eating?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," she whispered. "I'll eat later." But later, she knew, meant nothing. Ethan watched the exchange, and a slow ache tightened beneath his ribs. He had seen desperation before, in war zones, in refugee camps, in his own childhood kitchen. But the quiet dignity of a mother starving herself for her children struck a deeper chord. Without drawing attention, he stood and walked to the counter. His voice dropped to a low murmur. "The bill for the woman and her 2 kids. Add 2 burgers and hot milk. Put it on my tab." When the server returned to Rachel's table with steaming plates, Rachel froze. "There must be a mistake," she whispered. "No mistake," the server said gently. "Someone wanted your kids to have a warm meal tonight." Emma and Jack cheered, their small hands reaching eagerly for the food. Rachel blinked hard, trying to stop her tears. She scanned the diner, but the stranger who had helped her was already rising to leave. Ethan clipped Ranger's leash, gave the room one last slow sweep, and stepped out the side door into the snow. He didn't need thanks. He had spent most of his adult life slipping into danger and out again without waiting for recognition. Habit made him invisible to praise. Minutes later, Rachel and the twins left the diner. Snow fell heavier, settling on their jackets as they hurried down the shortcut alley toward the rundown parking lot behind the block. Street lamps flickered weakly above them. Then 5 figures stepped out from behind an abandoned delivery truck. Dark jackets, slouched shoulders, hands buried in pockets in a way that made Rachel's stomach drop. "Well, would you look at that?" one of the men drawled, twirling a metal keychain between his fingers. "Little family out on Christmas Eve. Easy pickings." Rachel tightened her grip on Emma and Jack. Her breath caught in her throat. A short distance away, moving along the outer row of parked cars, Ranger halted. His ears snapped upward. His tail stiffened. A single low bark, short, warning, unmistakable, broke from his chest. Ethan stopped mid-stride. His eyes narrowed toward the alley. His shoulders rose beneath his coat, tension rippling through him like an old instinct snapping awake. He had sworn to stay out of trouble. He had promised himself that civilian life would mean quiet days and no more confrontations in the dark. But the sound of Ranger's bark, the tone of it, told him everything. He stood at the edge of the lot, snow settling on his coat, weighing the promise he made against the one that had shaped him long before. Never walk away when someone weaker is outnumbered. At the end of the alley, 5 shadows closed in. From afar, Ranger lowered into a silent stance, muscles taut, waiting for the command he had been trained his whole life to obey. And Ethan Cole, former Navy SEAL, stood in the snow, caught between restraint and the rising inevitability of justice. The chapter ends with the winter wind lifting, the thugs drawing nearer, and no one knowing whether the man and his dog will step back or step in. When a Navy SEAL steps back into the dark, snow whispered across the alley, brushing against brick walls and scattering under the glow of a flickering street lamp. Ethan Cole moved toward the mouth of the alley with controlled purpose, his steps soundless despite the crunch of ice beneath his boots. His breath formed pale clouds before dissolving into the night, and the scar on his left knee pulsed, a warning from old battles, revived whenever danger loomed. Ranger followed tightly at his side, the German shepherd's sable coat bristling, amber eyes narrowed in unwavering focus. Ahead, Rachel Adams stood protectively in front of her twins, arms spread wide. Her breath trembled. Her slight frame, thin from too many skipped meals, looked even smaller against the wall of threats before her. Emma and Jack clung to the back of her coat, their young faces streaked with cold and fear. 5 young men in dark jackets blocked their path. Their ages hovered somewhere in their early 20s, reckless years where bravado often masked insecurity. The one who stepped forward first was tall and wiry, with a shaved head and a crooked grin. His name, Ethan would later learn, was Kyle Mercer. Kyle's pale skin carried a sallow undertone, and his eyes, sharp but unfocused, hinted at someone who had spent too much time running from responsibility and chasing the kind of trouble that left scars. The second man, broader and heavier, had a patchy beard and a permanently clenched jaw. His name was Tyler Briggs. Tyler moved with the restless twitch of a man always half a breath from snapping, and the deep-set lines around his eyes suggested a life hardened early by someone else's violence. The remaining 3 were quieter, shadows following stronger shadows, each wearing the same false confidence stitched across their smirking faces. Ethan took 1 step forward. It was enough to shift the air. "Ranger, left," he murmured. The shepherd obeyed instantly, pivoting with crisp precision until he stood slightly ahead, body angled toward the growing threat. His muscles tightened beneath his harness, poised yet controlled, an animal trained to act within the slimmest margin between warning and force. Kyle flicked the metal keychain in his hand and laughed. "Well, look at this. A hero wants to join the party." Ethan's voice cut through the bone, low and steady. "She said no. Walk away." Tyler scoffed. "Who are you to order us around?" Ethan didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "Former Navy SEAL." The words sank into the alley like a stone dropped into still water. Even the snow seemed to pause mid-air. Ethan's posture, square shoulders, grounded stance, eyes sharp as tactical glass, made the title irrefutable. The SEALs were spoken of quietly in Cleveland, like myths whispered in bars by men who had never met one. "And the dog?" Kyle sneered. Ranger's lips curled just enough to expose a single white tooth. Ethan answered, "Trained for protection. He won't bite unless you make a mistake." A beat of silence pressed against the brick walls. Kyle made the mistake. He stepped forward and shoved at Ethan's shoulder. Ethan moved faster than the shove itself. He caught Kyle's wrist, rotated it sharply, and sent him crashing onto the snow in a controlled arc. A takedown so swift Kyle didn't even have time to gasp. Tyler lunged next, fists swinging wide in anger. Ethan pivoted, blocked, and swept Tyler's legs out from beneath him. The impact forced a rough grunt from Tyler's chest as his back struck the frozen ground. The third man, the smallest, with a nervous bobbing neck, attempted to flank Ethan from the side. Ranger surged forward half a step, issuing a guttural warning that froze the man mid-stride. His face drained of color as the shepherd's gaze locked onto him with the cold focus of a weapon fully primed. The last two attackers broke. Their boots slipped against the snow as they scrambled away, colliding with each other before vanishing down the alley. Kyle groaned. Tyler cursed under his breath. Ranger stood motionless, awaiting Ethan's next command. Ethan stepped back, hands lowered but alert, his breath steady. "Enough," he said. The authority in his tone left no room for argument. The two remaining men scrambled to their feet and staggered away, slipping over patches of ice in their haste to flee the Navy SEAL and the silent creature at his side. Rachel's knees nearly gave out as the tension dissolved at once. She dropped to the ground, arms wrapping tightly around Emma and Jack. Both children were crying, soft, quivering sobs, but their wide eyes remained fixed on Ranger, not in fear, in awe. The shepherd, sensing their distress, shifted subtly, shoulders lowering, ears softening. The transformation from lethal guardian to gentle sentinel was almost impossible to believe, yet completely real. His amber eyes flicked toward Ethan as though asking permission. "Sit," Ethan commanded quietly. Ranger sank onto his haunches, posture calm, breath steady. Rachel lifted her face. Snow clung to her eyelashes like delicate frost. You saved us," she whispered. Ethan shook his head gently. "He saved you too," he said, nodding to Ranger. For a moment, none of them spoke. The cold wind swept through the alley again, but it no longer felt like the same wind. Rachel saw then what she had not understood inside the diner. Why the waitress spoke of kindness in hushed tones. Why the stranger slipped away without waiting for thanks. This man and his dog were something else entirely. A threat to anyone cruel enough to prey on the weak. A shield to anyone who had run out of strength. Ranger gave a low chuff, turning his head back toward the deeper shadows of the lot, as if reminding them that danger, like winter, had a habit of returning unless someone stood guard. The night had not finished testing them yet. Scars of war and a new promise. A thin winter dawn barely touched the rooftops when Ethan Cole stepped out of his truck, the cold wind biting through the fabric of his navy coat. The apartment complex Rachel had described stood crooked against the gray sky. Its exterior wood panels were warped from years of rain, and the stairway railings shook under the slightest touch. Frost clung to the windows like a warning. Ranger padded beside Ethan, each step silent, his breath forming pale clouds. The German shepherd's sable coat bristled as he took in the smells of the corridor, mold, rust, and exhaustion. Ethan knocked. The sound echoed down the narrow hallway before the door cracked open. Rachel Adams stood there, wrapped in a washed-out sweater. Her auburn hair was loosely tied, strands falling across her tired face. The sleepless night had deepened the shadows beneath her eyes. She was slender to the point of fragility, but her posture was not weak, only weary, like someone who had fought too many battles alone. When she saw Ethan, surprise flashed through her expression, followed by something softer, relief she tried to hide. Behind her, Emma and Jack peered out. Emma's curls were messy, falling over her round cheeks. Jack had a cowlick sticking straight up, freckles standing out against his sleepy face. Their jackets lay folded on a single chair, still damp from melted snow. Ranger stepped forward a little, tail held in a neutral line. The twins lit up instantly. "Can we pet him today?" Jack asked, then squinted at the harness, mouthing the printed warning. Ethan lowered his hand in a calming gesture. "Ranger decides," he said. The dog took a small step closer, lowering his head gently. Two small palms rested on his thick fur. Something in the cramped hallway changed, the air warmed by a flicker of trust neither child had felt in a long time. Ethan entered the apartment. The living room was scarcely larger than his kitchen pantry. A sagging couch occupied one corner, and the heater wheezed like an old man gasping for breath. A single lamp cast a pale glow over the peeling wallpaper. Rachel gestured awkwardly. Sorry, it's small. It's temporary, Ethan replied. She studied him cautiously. There was a question in her eyes, one she held back out of pride. He didn't force it. He simply listened as she explained her situation in quiet, halting sentences. She had lost her last stable job 3 months earlier. She cleaned houses whenever work was available. The landlord had hinted she was already past grace on rent, and the cold was getting worse. As she spoke, her fingers twisted the hem of her sweater. Emma leaned into her side. Jack sat near Ranger, absently stroking the dog's flank. Ethan looked around the room again. The thin blankets, the cracked window panes, the pile of school worksheets the twins had done by flashlight. He knew too many families like this. He had walked through villages overseas where mothers held their children the same way, as if shielding them with sheer willpower. He had seen what happened when people were forced to choose between safety and survival, and he had made a promise once, whispered in a hospital room to a mother whose voice was fading. Don't turn your back on the vulnerable. He cleared his throat softly. Rachel, he said, you and the kids shouldn't stay here tonight. The temperature will drop again. I have a safe place with heat, beds, and security on site. Her reaction was immediate, a tightening around her eyes, a stiffening of her spine. I appreciate everything you've done, she murmured, but I can't be someone's charity case. Ethan shook his head, his voice steady. That's not what this is. I don't give handouts. I help people who refuse to give up on their kids. That's not weakness, that's strength. She hesitated. His words weren't sweet, but they were solid. And coming from a man whose presence seemed carved from duty itself, they carried weight. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching. His gaze flicked from Rachel to the children, then to Ethan, as though encouraging the decision. Emma tugged her mother's sleeve. Mom, Ranger's house has warm beds, right? Jack chimed in. And maybe hot chocolate? Rachel exhaled shakily. The fight inside her crumbled, not from defeat, but from finally seeing a path she didn't have to walk alone. All right, she whispered, just for tonight. Outside, snow swirled through the courtyard as Ethan escorted them to his truck. Ranger sat in the back, between the twins, who giggled whenever he nudged their hands with his nose. For the first time in hours, Rachel leaned back in her seat, exhaustion and gratitude mingling behind her eyes. Ethan drove in silence, but his thoughts churned. He knew bringing them to his secure facility was the immediate answer. The real question was what came next. At a traffic light, he glanced in the rearview mirror. Ranger watched him steadily, like a second conscience. A protector who understood the darkness Ethan carried, and the responsibility he never escaped. By the time they reached the building, the decision had already settled in his chest. He wasn't just offering shelter. He was stepping into another fight, one without gunfire or battlefields, but just as important. And as they entered the warm-lit lobby, Rachel noticed the faintest change in Ethan's posture, not a softening, but the beginning of something else. A man allowing himself to return to the world he always tried to protect. This chapter closes with Rachel and her children stepping into safety for the first time, and Ethan quietly realizing he has crossed the line between helping strangers and defending a family he has not yet admitted he cares about. A new winter and a different home. Snow drifted lightly over the converted warehouse as Ethan Cole pulled his truck into the gated lot. The building, once a rusted storage space, now stood solid and quiet beneath the gray morning sky. Its clean brickwork and reinforced doors a testament to the veterans who rebuilt it. A faint glow spilled from inside, where warm light softened the industrial edges of the once forgotten structure. Rachel Adams stepped out of the truck first, her auburn hair shaking loose from her knit cap. The exhaustion that once weighed on her face had eased slightly, replaced by the nervous hope of someone stepping into unfamiliar safety. Emma and Jack hurried after her, boots squeaking against the ice, their cheeks flushed red from cold and excitement. Ranger leaped down from the back seat with a quiet precision that contrasted with the twins' stumbling enthusiasm. The German shepherd's thick sable coat glimmered under the pale sun, and his harness fit snugly across his muscular frame. He sniffed the air, ears rotating like twin radars, assessing every sound in the compound. Inside the facility, the air felt instantly warmer. A radio played low-country music somewhere beyond the front desk. Along the far wall, several veterans trained service dogs, their commands crisp and rhythmic. The dogs, mostly shepherds and labs, moved with disciplined grace. One of the trainers, Marcus Hale, lifted a hand in greeting. He was a tall black man in his mid-40s, bald, with a salt and pepper beard trimmed with military neatness. His build was broad and powerful, but his eyes carried a softness that hinted at deep patience. Marcus had retired from the Marine Corps after a shoulder injury ended his deployment days, yet he still carried the posture of someone used to standing guard. "Well now," Marcus said with a low whistle, "this the family you mentioned?" "This is Rachel, Emma, and Jack," Ethan introduced. "They'll be staying here for a while." Marcus crouched to greet the twins. "Welcome, little warriors," he said with a grin. His voice was deep but gentle, warming even the coldest corners of the room. Jack brightened instantly. Emma hid behind her mother's leg, peeking out with cautious curiosity. Rachel offered a small smile. "Thank you for having us." Marcus shook his head. "Thank him," he said, nodding to Ethan. "This man doesn't help people lightly." Ethan cleared his throat and changed the subject. "Let's give them a tour." They walked through the facility, passing a kitchenette, a row of small offices, and a lounge with faded couches and a coffee table cluttered with newspapers. Emma's gaze darted everywhere, at the framed medals on the wall, at the bulletin board filled with photos of rescued dogs, at the quiet men moving with rigid discipline and surprising kindness. Jack found himself drawn toward Ranger's training space, where the shepherd paused and nudged the boy's hand with his nose. Ethan caught the interaction and let himself smile. Just a flicker, but genuine. Later that week, Ethan began helping Rachel navigate job opportunities. He drove her to the Clearstone Facility Services office, a squat brick building run by a stern-looking woman named Patricia Ward, who was in her 50s with short silver hair and sharp brown eyes. Patricia was known for being tough but fair, and the deep lines across her forehead suggested a lifetime of managing chaos. Rachel sat nervously in Patricia's small office, hardly knowing what to do with her hands. Patricia, dressed in a crisp gray blazer, examined Rachel's application with her signature raised brow. "You've done cleaning work before?" Patricia asked. "Yes," Rachel answered, her voice steady though her fingers trembled slightly. "Mostly residential, sometimes commercial." Patricia tapped a pen against the desk. "Pay is steady. Hours can be long. We need people who don't quit halfway." Rachel straightened her posture. "I don't quit." After a long pause, Patricia nodded once. "All right. You start Monday." Outside, Rachel leaned against Ethan's truck, tears filling her eyes. Not of despair this time, but disbelief. "Why are you doing all this for us?" she whispered. Ethan looked away toward the snow drifting down. "When you shielded your kids in that alley, you reminded me of every woman who ever stood between danger and someone smaller. My mother was one of them." It was the most personal thing he had said to her. And though he did not elaborate, the truth in his tone needed no further explanation. Over the next days, Ethan also contacted Lakeview Elementary, a community-focused school in a safer district. He spoke with Principal Sarah Whitford, a short, round-faced woman with curly blonde hair and bright blue eyes. Sarah's warm smile contrasted with the firm authority in her tone. She radiated the energy of someone who had spent years guiding children with both compassion and structure. "For twins like Emma and Jack," Sarah said, "we have scholarships available. We just need some basic paperwork." Rachel signed the forms with trembling hands. Every signature felt like a doorway opening. Finally, on a calm winter afternoon, Ethan drove the family to a quiet neighborhood. Rows of small two-bedroom homes lined the street, simple but well-kept, with porches strung with holiday lights. He parked in front of a cream-colored house with a green door. "This is it," he said. The interior smelled faintly of paint and pine cleaner. The wooden floors were old but polished, and sunlight warmed the living room through a wide front window. Emma squealed and dashed down the hallway. Jack opened every drawer he could reach. Rachel stood rooted in the doorway, her gloved hand covering her mouth as tears slid down her cheeks. "How long until we have to leave?" she whispered. "This isn't temporary," Ethan replied. "The lease is yours. I'm just helping with the first few months." For the first time since he had met her, Rachel's face held pure disbelief mixed with hope too large to hide. Ethan stepped back toward Ranger, allowing the family to explore their new home. Something eased in his chest, a weight he'd carried alone for years. And for the first time in a long time, warmth spread through the hollow places inside him. A soldier's promise and the family he found. Winter settled over Cleveland with the quiet authority of a familiar monarch, laying a soft white quilt over rooftops and sidewalks. Years had passed, though the city's winter looked the same, steel gray skies, chimney smoke curling upward, and snowflakes drifting in slow spirals. What had changed were the lives inside the little cream-colored house with the green door. Emma and Jack were no longer the timid 6-year-olds Ethan Cole had met in a dark alley. They were now tall, lively children. Jack with his unruly brown hair that never quite obeyed a comb, Emma with long auburn waves that matched her mother's. Their cheeks were fuller, their smiles unburdened. They wore warm coats, solid boots, and the confidence of kids who no longer feared empty cupboards or cold nights. Ranger, now nearing 9, had grown into a dignified old warrior. Gray threaded through the sable fur along his muzzle, and tiny flecks of white touched the edges of his ears. His eyes were still the same sharp amber, watchful, disciplined, unwavering. He moved slower now, but when something rustled in the distance or a stranger lingered too long near the property line, those eyes sharpened like a blade honed by memory alone. Age had softened his coat, not his instincts. And Ethan was a constant, even as time added faint creases near the corners of his eyes. He still wore the same navy coat, still walked with that slight hitch in his left leg, a reminder of sandstorms, broken terrain, and a mission that had ended with him being carried out instead of walking. His voice was a little more lined, his hair a little more silver, but his presence, calm, steady, quietly formidable, remained untouched. He had not changed his habits either. Each evening he walked the perimeter of the neighborhood with Ranger at his side, his gaze sweeping the quiet residential street. To others he looked like a man walking his dog, but those who knew him, and a handful of men who had once considered trouble, recognized the truth. A Navy SEAL never stopped guarding the world around him. Inside their home, warmth glowed through every room. Rachel Adams stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, stirring a pot of stew. She was stronger now, her figure still slender but no longer frail, her complexion brighter, the shadows beneath her eyes long gone. Her auburn hair fell loosely across her shoulders. She worked at Clearstone Facility Services full-time, respected by co-workers like Patricia Ward, who now counted Rachel among her most reliable employees. Rachel checked the clock and smiled. Ethan and Ranger would be doing their last walk of the night. In the living room, Emma and Jack sprawled on the floor in front of the television. A documentary on military special operations flickered on the screen. Men in camo gear swam through dark waves. Others fast-roped from helicopters. The narrator spoke in solemn admiration of discipline few ever reached. Emma glanced toward the door where Ethan had stepped out moments earlier. "To everyone else," she whispered, "he's a Navy SEAL." Jack nodded, lowering his voice in the same reverent tone. "But to us, he's the one who turned the lights back on." Outside, snow thickened, swirling beneath the street lamps. Ethan walked along the fence line, boots sinking an inch into fresh powder. Ranger trotted beside him, nose twitching, tail held low and steady. The cold air stung Ethan's scarred knee, but he welcomed the burn. It meant he was still capable, still present, still guarding. He paused at the corner of the yard, resting a gloved hand on the top rail. Through the window, he could see the soft glow of the kitchen light, Rachel's silhouette moving gently as she tasted the stew, the twins' laughter drifting faintly into the night. It had become a rhythm he cherished. Rachel, standing by the window, watched him for a long moment. Her breath fogged the glass as she pressed her fingers lightly against the frame. The sight of Ethan, broad-shouldered, quiet, his shadow stretching across the snow beside Ranger, filled her with a peace she had once believed impossible. Years ago, she had stood terrified in a diner, clutching a crumpled $20 bill. Now she stood safe in a warm home because a stranger had decided not to walk away. She whispered softly to herself, "Back then, he wasn't ours. Now, he is part of us." Ranger barked once, low, controlled, intentional. A squirrel darted along the fence, but the bark was more than a warning to small creatures. It was a reminder. He still watched, still guarded, still lived by training sharpened through years beside Ethan. Troublemakers had learned this truth quickly. No one wandered into the neighborhood with ill intent twice. Not after seeing a tall man with intense dark eyes step out of the shadows with a dog whose stare could freeze a coward mid-step. The legend of the quiet seal on Maple Street traveled faster than any police bulletin. Inside, Rachel lit the last candle on the mantel. Outside, Ethan turned back toward the house. Ranger trotted ahead, snow scattering from his paws like sparks. When Ethan reached the porch, he paused a moment before stepping in, taking in the glow, the warmth, the laughter muffled behind the walls. a home he never expected, a family he never sought, a promise he intended to keep for the rest of his life. The chapter closes where the journey began: winter, snow, and a man and his dog. But this time, there is no fear, only the presence of quiet guardians. And any predator foolish enough to test the peace of this home would learn, swiftly and decisively, that a Navy SEAL and his loyal German Shepherd still walk these streets. In the quiet glow of that winter night, one truth rose above every falling snowflake. Sometimes God sends his miracles not as thunder or lightning, but as ordinary people who choose to stand up when others turn away. A mother searching for shelter, two children longing for safety, a soldier carrying old wounds, and a faithful dog who never leaves his side. Each of them stepped into the same moment for a reason only heaven could weave. And maybe that is the lesson for us all. That kindness is never small. That courage often walks in silence. That God uses human hands to lift the broken, guide the lost, and guard the vulnerable. If you have ever felt alone, may this story remind you that the Lord still works in hidden ways. If you have ever helped someone, may you know that heaven sees every quiet act of mercy. And if you are waiting for a miracle, may your heart stay open, because it may already be walking towards you. Before you go, share this story with someone who needs hope tonight. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from so we can pray with you. And subscribe to the channel for more stories that honor courage, compassion, and the quiet miracles God plants in our everyday lives. May the Lord bless you, keep you warm this winter, and place his protection over everyone you love.